My name is Robert Michael Kowalski, and in August of 1956, I was a 23-year-old petty officer second class stationed at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey, working the night shift as a radar technician in the control tower, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened on the night of August 14th. I was trained by the best. I knew every signature on that scope, every blip, every anomaly, every weather pattern, every commercial flight path within 200 miles, and what appeared on my screen at 21:47 hours that night was none of those things. And 19 years later, I still wake up smelling burning hydrogen and hearing the screams of men who died because we didn't understand what we were dealing with until it was too late. And the Navy knows exactly what happened that night, but they buried it under classified stamps and threatened anyone who tried to talk. And I'm 64 years old now with stage 4 lung cancer and 6 months to live according to the doctors at Walter Reed. So what are they going to do to me that cancer hasn't already done? And the families of the 18 men who burned to death on Hangar 1's apron deserve to know the truth, that their sons and husbands and fathers didn't die in an accident. They died because something came out of the sky and killed them. Deliberately, methodically, and impossibly. It was supposed to be a routine night. The USS Macon II, our experimental heavy-lift airship, was scheduled to dock at 2200 hours after a 3-day operational test over the Atlantic, testing new radar-absorbent materials and silent propulsion systems that the Navy hoped would give us an edge in submarine detection. And I was one of 4 radar operators on duty, along with Chief Petty Officer Daniel Marchetti, who had 20 years in the Navy and could read a radar scope like some men read sheet music, Seaman First Class James Delaney, who was fresh out of A school and still learning the equipment, and Lieutenant Commander Paul Stafford, who was the watch officer and the kind of man who went by the book even when the book made no sense. The kind who would document everything in triplicate and never question orders, which is probably why he's still alive, and was promoted to captain within 2 years, while the rest of us who saw what really happened were transferred to different bases and told to forget. The evening started normal. I clocked in at 2000, relieved the swing shift operator, checked the equipment logs, calibrated the scopes, noted that we had clear skies, temperature 68 degrees, wind from the northeast at 12 knots, perfect conditions for the Macon II to dock, and the airship was a beautiful piece of engineering, 820 feet long, experimental rigid frame made of a new aluminum alloy, filled with helium not hydrogen, because the Navy learned that lesson with the Hindenburg 19 years earlier on this very field, equipped with 6 diesel engines that could run nearly silent when needed, and carrying a crew of 47 men, including Commander Robert Hayes, who was the ship's captain and who I'd played poker with 2 weeks earlier, and who told me about his daughter's upcoming wedding in September and asked if I could get leave to attend because I was dating his niece Sarah at the time. And Hayes burned to death at his command station when the interior of the gondola reached temperatures hot enough to melt steel, and they only identified him from his Naval Academy ring fused to what remained of his left hand. At 21:30, we received radio contact from Macon II. They were 70 miles out, on schedule, all systems normal, requesting approach clearance, and Stafford gave them clearance to proceed to Lakehurst at current altitude of 3,000 feet, standard approach. And I remember Marchetti making a joke about how the airship boys had it easy, just floating along while the rest of us worked for a living. And Delaney laughed, and I was plotting their approach vector on my scope when at 21:47 exactly, I know because I noted the time in my log before everything went to hell, a second contact appeared on my screen. No transponder signal, no flight plan, no radio contact, coming from the northeast at impossible speed, and I mean impossible. I watched it cross 50 miles of airspace in under 90 seconds, which put it at something like 2,000 miles per hour, and in 1956, nothing could move that fast, not even our experimental jets, and the signature was wrong, too large to be an aircraft, moving in ways that defied physics, stopping and starting without deceleration, making 90-degree turns at full speed, and I called out the contact to Marchetti, and he came over to look at my scope, and his face went pale, actually pale, and he said, "That can't be right. Your equipment's malfunctioning." And I switched to the backup radar, and the contact was still there, now circling the Macon II at a distance of approximately 5 miles, matching its course and speed. And Stafford came over and looked and said, "Get Commander Hayes on the radio. Advise him he has an unidentified aircraft in his vicinity." And I tried, but Macon II wasn't responding. Their radio was dead or jammed, just static, that electronic screaming static that makes your fillings hurt. And Marchetti grabbed the emergency frequency and broadcast in the clear. "Unidentified aircraft in the vicinity of Lakehurst Naval Air Station. You are in restricted military airspace. Identify yourself immediately." And there was no response. just that static, and the object on the radar, I'm going to call it an object because it wasn't an aircraft, not anything built by human hands, began to descend, dropping from 12,000 feet to 3,000 feet in seconds, positioning itself directly above the Macon 2, and I could see on the scope that it was massive. The return signal indicated something at least 300 feet in diameter, circular or disc-shaped based on the echo pattern, and Delaney said, "Jesus Christ, what is that thing?" And Stafford told him to maintain professional composure. But I could hear the fear in Stafford's voice, that crack that appears when a man's training collides with something his training never prepared him for. At 21:52, the tower phone rang. It was the duty officer from Hangar 1 reporting that ground crew outside had visual contact with an object in the sky, described as a large metallic disc with pulsating lights hovering above the approaching airship. And within 30 seconds, we had reports coming in from 3 different locations on the base, all saying the same thing, something enormous in the sky, something impossible. And I abandoned my scope and ran to the tower windows and looked northeast toward the approach vector, and I saw it. God help me. I saw it, hanging there against the night sky about 4 miles out, a massive disc-shaped object that seemed to glow with its own light, a sickly greenish-white luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. And beneath it, I could see the Macon 2, tiny by comparison, still approaching the field. And the disc was descending, slowly, deliberately, maintaining position directly above the airship, and I could see lights on the disc's underside. Not navigational lights, but something else. Geometric patterns of light that rotated and pulsed in sequences that hurt to watch, that made your eyes water and your head pound. And Marchetti was on the emergency line to the base commander, shouting into the phone, "Sir, we have an unidentified object over the airfield. We need to scramble fighters. We need to get that airship down now." And I heard the base commander's response over the speaker, telling Marchetti to calm down, to verify the contact, to confirm it wasn't a weather balloon or experimental aircraft. And Marchetti screamed, "It's not a goddamn balloon, sir. It's the size of a football field." And Stafford grabbed the phone and tried to smooth things over, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the receiver. At 21:56, the Macon 2's radio crackled back to life, and we heard Commander Hayes' voice, distorted and panicked, nothing like the calm professional I'd played cards with, saying, "Lakehurst Tower, we have a situation. We have an object directly above us. Our instruments are going haywire. Engines 2 and 4 are dead. We're losing altitude, requesting emergency landing clearance." And Stafford authorized immediate emergency landing, ordered the ground crew to prepare for crash protocols, and Hayes responded, "Negative. We can maintain controlled descent. We're going to attempt to." And then his transmission cut to static, that same painful electronic shriek, and on my radar scope, I watched the object descend further, now less than 500 feet above the airship, and the Macon 2's signature began to distort on the screen, fragmenting and reforming. And Marchetti said, "They're being hit with some kind of electromagnetic pulse. Their systems are failing." And I could see through the tower windows that the airship was losing stability, its nose dipping, engines cutting in and out, and the disc above it was getting brighter, that pulsating light intensifying to the point where I had to squint to look at it. And I felt something then, a vibration that I didn't hear, but felt in my chest cavity, in my bones, a subsonic thrum that made my vision blur and my stomach turn over. At 21:58, the lights happened. I don't know what else to call them. Lights, but that word doesn't capture it. Beams of coherent energy, brilliant blue-white like arc welding, but 1,000 times brighter, shot down from the disc's underside and struck the Macon 2, 3 separate beams hitting the airship's envelope at different points. And I watched through binoculars as the fabric skin of the airship began to glow where the beams touched it, glowing red then white-hot. And Hayes was on the radio screaming, we're on fire, all hands abandon ship." And I could see men jumping from the gondola, even though we were still at 2,000 feet. Tiny figures plummeting into the darkness rather than burn, and the helium cells inside the envelope began to rupture from the heat, not burning because helium doesn't burn, but the structural frames were melting, aluminum girders turning to liquid metal, and the diesel fuel in the engine compartments ignited, massive orange fireballs erupting along the airship's length. And then, and this is the part that still gives me nightmares 43 years later, the entire airship began to collapse inward, not falling, collapsing. as if something was crushing it from all sides simultaneously, compacting 800 feet of rigid airship into a ball of burning wreckage no bigger than a house. And I could hear the screams over the radio, men burning alive, men being crushed by collapsing metal, and the disc above just hung there, pulsing with that sick green light. And Marchetti was crying, actual tears streaming down his face, saying, "What is it doing? Why is it doing this? What did we do?" And Stafford had his service revolver out for some insane reason, as if he could shoot something 4 miles away and 4,000 feet in the air. And Delaney had collapsed into a chair and was vomiting onto the floor, and I just stood there watching through those binoculars as the compressed ball of burning wreckage that had been the USS Macon II fell out of the sky and impacted the ground 300 yards short of the runway, hitting with enough force that I felt it in the tower, a shockwave that rattled windows and knocked equipment off tables, and diesel fuel sprayed everywhere and ignited, turning the crash site into an inferno. And the disc above rotated slowly, almost leisurely, those geometric light patterns still pulsing, and then it began to ascend, slowly at first, then accelerating to impossible speed, and within 10 seconds, it was gone from visual range. And on my radar scope, I tracked it heading northeast at what I calculated as Mach 5 or faster, altitude climbing to 60,000 feet, then off the scope entirely, gone like it had never existed. We stood there in the tower for maybe 15 seconds in complete silence, listening to the fire alarms going off across the base, watching the flames from the crash site light up the night sky. And then Stafford said in this dead flat voice, "Log the time as 22:02. The USS Macon II crashed due to structural failure and engine fire, no survivors." And I said, "What about the disc? What about the object that shot it down?" And he turned to me, and his eyes were empty, shocked, empty. And he said, "There was no disc. There was no object. The airship experienced catastrophic systems failure. That's what happened. That's what goes in the log." And Marchetti said, "Paul, for Christ's sake, half the base saw it. There are hundreds of witnesses." And Stafford said, "The official investigation will determine the cause of the crash. Our job is to maintain radio communication and document what we observed, which was an airship crash, period, end of story." And I started to argue, but Marchetti grabbed my arm and pulled me aside and whispered, Don't fight this. They'll bury you if you fight this." And I said, 18 men just died. We watched them die. We have to tell someone what really happened." And Marchetti said, "Who are you going to tell? The Navy? They already know. Why do you think the base commander wasn't more concerned when I reported the object? They knew it was there. They've probably been tracking it for hours, and now they're going to clean this up and make it go away, and anyone who talks is going to disappear along with it." And I wanted to believe he was wrong, wanted to believe the Navy would investigate properly, would acknowledge what we'd seen. But deep down, I knew he was right, because within an hour, the base was locked down, armed Marines at every gate, no one in or out. And within 2 hours, men in dark suits with no visible insignia showed up in the tower and confiscated every log, every recording, every piece of paper with notes on it. And they pulled us into separate rooms and questioned us for 6 hours straight, the same questions over and over. "What did you see? What did the radar show? Who did you tell? Who else knows?" And I told them the truth the first 3 times, and by the 4th interrogation, I understood that the truth was not what they wanted. They wanted me to confirm the official story: airship structural failure, tragic accident, no other factors involved. And when I finally said what they wanted to hear, they released me with orders to report to my new duty station in Guam within 72 hours, effective transfer, no appeal. And I never saw Marchetti or Delaney again, both transferred to different bases, different oceans, efficiently separated so we could never compare notes or support each other's accounts. The official investigation concluded that the USS Macon II experienced catastrophic structural failure due to metal fatigue and design flaws in the experimental airframe, that the diesel fuel tanks ruptured during the collapse, that the resulting fire consumed the airship before it could complete an emergency landing, that all 47 crew members perished, that it was a tragic accident, but there was no negligence and no external factors involved, and the airship program was quietly canceled. All experimental rigid airships scrapped, all research documents classified, and if you look up the USS Macon II today, you'll find barely a footnote, a failed experimental program, a cautionary tale about pushing technology too far too fast, and the families of the 47 men who died were told their loved ones died serving their country, testing advanced systems, heroes of naval aviation, but they weren't told that their sons and husbands and fathers were murdered, shot down by something we couldn't identify and couldn't fight, something that appeared on radar and in the sky, and in the nightmares of everyone who witnessed it. And the Navy knows, they've always known, because this wasn't the first incident and it wasn't the last. And 2 years later, in 1958, I read a classified report about a similar object over an Air Force base in Montana that shut down nuclear missiles. And in 1965, there was an incident in New Mexico, and in 1967, another one in Michigan, a pattern of encounters with craft that demonstrated technology decades or centuries beyond ours. Technology that could disable our weapons systems, that could destroy our aircraft, that could kill our personnel with impunity, and we had no defense, no response, no explanation, just cover-ups and classifications and transfers and threats. I spent the rest of my naval career in Guam working on submarine communications, as far from airships and radar and unexplained contacts as they could put me, and I never talked about what I saw, not to my wife Sarah. Yes, I married Hayes's niece, and I never told her that I watched her uncle burn to death while something from the sky crushed his ship into scrap metal. Not to my children, not to the VA psychiatrist who treated me for what they called service-related anxiety disorder, but what was actually PTSD from watching men die and being told it never happened. And I kept quiet for 43 years because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my pension, afraid of being institutionalized, afraid of disappearing like others who talked too much. But I'm dying now. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Lung cancer from all those cigarettes I smoked to calm my nerves after sleepless nights remembering the screams. And Sarah died 3 years ago, never knowing the truth about her uncle. And I'm 64 years old with nothing left to lose and everything left to say. On August 14th, 1956, at approximately 2200 hours, something not built by human hands appeared in the skies over Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. It deliberately attacked and destroyed a United States Navy airship. It killed 47 American servicemen, and the United States Navy covered it up. They classified the evidence. They transferred the witnesses. They threatened anyone who questioned the official story. They buried the truth under layers of secrecy and lies, and they've been doing it for decades. Every time something appears that we can't explain, every time our pilots encounter craft that violate the laws of physics, every time our radar tracks objects that move at impossible speeds, they investigate, they document, they classify, they deny, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that we're not alone, that we're not the dominant intelligence, that there's something out there with technology so advanced that we're like children playing with toys in comparison. And our weapons are useless, our defenses are meaningless, and if they wanted to, they could do to every city on Earth what they did to the Macon II that night: crush us, burn us, erase us, and there's nothing we could do to stop them. I saw it happen. I watched it on radar and through binoculars. I heard men dying over the radio. I felt the impact when 820 feet of airship was compressed into a ball and dropped from the sky. I smelled the burning diesel fuel and melted aluminum and cooked flesh when the wind shifted and carried the smoke from the crash site across the base. And I tasted copper in my mouth for 3 days afterward, that metallic taste that comes from fear and adrenaline and the understanding that everything you believed about reality just got turned inside out, and no amount of official investigation or classified documents or transfer orders can erase what I experienced that night. What Marchetti experienced, what Delaney experienced, what hundreds of personnel on that base experienced. We all saw it. We all know what happened. But most of us carried it to our graves because the alternative was losing everything: career, reputation, freedom, maybe life. And I'm carrying it to my grave too, but at least I'm leaving this testimony behind, recorded on tape and transcribed by a reporter who promised to hold it until after my death, and maybe it'll make a difference. Maybe someone will read this and ask questions. Maybe the families of the 47 men who died will finally learn the truth. Or maybe it'll be dismissed as the ravings of a dying man, conspiracy theory, unreliable witness, post-traumatic delusions, and the cover-up will continue for another 50 years, another century, forever. But I know what I saw. I know what happened on August 14th, 1956, and I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional. I'm not seeking attention or money or fame. I'm dying, and I have nothing to gain from lying. I'm simply telling the truth that the United States Navy has spent 43 years trying to bury. The truth that something not human came out of the sky that night and killed 47 American sailors, and it's still out there, whatever it is, and it's been seen dozens of times since, hundreds of times, thousands of encounters documented and classified and denied, and someday, maybe soon, maybe not for another 100 years, it's going to come back, and when it does, we need to be ready. We need to be honest. We need to stop pretending it doesn't exist and start preparing for what happens when they decide we're not worth ignoring anymore. When they decide that crushing one airship wasn't enough, when they decide to crush us all. And on that day, the people who covered up Lakehurst and Malmstrom and Rendlesham and Nimitz and all the others will have blood on their hands, the blood of everyone who dies because we were too afraid to admit the truth, too proud to acknowledge that we're not alone, too blind to see what was right there in the sky, pulsing with that sick green light, waiting.